you would, welcome Tim Kopp. Thanks. And then, well, why don't we dive in?
Okay, let's do it.
So, other than what I think you're most notably known for is your role as CMO at ExactTarget. I think other than what you're doing now as in the venture capital space, we'll chat a bit more about that. But talk to us a little bit about how you go from college and you end up at this CMO of this what becomes a big corporation.
Yeah, I wouldn't have picked it. Guess what my undergrad was? Finance and accounting. So it makes sense that somehow this is what I'm doing. But so I would not have picked this. In fact, I really didn't know what marketing was as a profession kind of when I started. But came out of school really early on, did management training at a bank, Fifth Third Bank, which was in Cincinnati, and got to work second shift item processing, so managing a team of 70 people who encoded all the checks from 3 in the afternoon till 3 in the morning, which was not necessarily what I would have picked as a first job, but I learned a lot about working with people. And went back to school, got my MBA in IT when a lot of the kind of the cloud work was beginning to happen a couple decades ago. And then landed at P&G, and they hired me to become, at the time they called it a change agent. The real truth is, my first actual job was a Lotus Notes developer, and I almost got fired. I was really bad at doing that. So what they ended up saying is, how can you really put you in a role to use technology to drive transformation? That work became known as digital marketing. It became creating websites and emails. I'm really sounding old now as I say this out loud, but that's what it was.
I remember those days.
Yes, okay. So back when AOL was ruling the world, and so it was really, really early on. We're one of the first 3 or 4 people at P&G doing the digital marketing work, and did the launch of Crest White Strips, and did a number of different things while I was there, and spent about 7 years, ended up running one of the larger divisions. And then from there, moved down to Coca-Cola in Atlanta, where I was fortunate enough to be their vice president of worldwide marketing for a couple of years. So kind of had 10 years of this sort of CPG experience, and then realized this whole sort of software evolution was coming. And I joined the advisory board for a firm called Web Trends, which is really early on in doing web analytics. And from there, they asked me to join their board of directors. And then from there, I kind of joined as their CMO. And at that time, as I looked around, I don't think there were 10 CMOs in all of B2B software. It was not a role that existed. It was really
senior
really
sales,
B2B.
Senior sales, but not marketing.
What year was that?
So that was
Web Trends was late 90s.
it was
2000?
early 2000s. Yeah. So it was early. In fact, when I told people I was a CMO, what the first 3 people said is, "I didn't know you were in the medical field," because they all thought I was a chief medical officer. They CMO just sort of didn't exist in software. So it was kind of cool. I got to write the playbook and make a lot of mistakes and learn some things, and then reapplied a lot of that when I went to spent a couple years at ExactTarget, and then one of the co-founders of ExactTarget called on Web Trends as a partner firm, and at that time Web Trends is about a $90 million business, and ExactTarget was about a $20 million business, just getting started. And he said, "Gosh, you're a Midwestern guy. Why are you flying all the way to the West Coast?" And ended up, I didn't know ExactTarget even existed. I don't think I'd even ever been to Indianapolis. And they invited me in for the user conference, and we fell in love.
And so you made the transition back. So inside that time at ExactTarget, so you come in, they're a growing company, but they're still relatively small.
Yeah.
Did you have a charge then as CMO? What was your target or your goal that you initially came in, and then what did that become during your time there?
Yeah, so when I joined, the marketing team was about 10 people. So, early-ish. Our run rate was just over 30 million. So we were beginning to kind of take root. And my primary charge was, I think about in a company that sales, marketing, and product need to be 3 gears that are interconnected, and they really need to work together, kind of like a watch, and how those all fit together. Our first CMO was Chris Baggett, who many of you guys know, and Chris was kind of one of the co-founders. He did a marvelous job at building the brand, wrote kind of the literal book on email marketing and helped really with building the category. But as things scaled, he's more of an innovator, I think, than an operator in some regards. And so it really became to operationalize the marketing function and to really catch the marketing gear up. I mean, it was just being dramatically outstripped by sales. And so my to-do list when I arrived was, I talk about prioritization being one of the most important things to make a marketing person successful. My to-do list was, I think, like 7 pages long when I gathered all the work that people wanted. But primarily what it was around was getting demand generation right for the sales team.
And so when you came in, most of it was outbound at that point? Or channels, I guess, back then, as opposed to inbound?
It was, that's right, as the brand was developing. We were still even working on getting a lot of the metrics nailed down, how much exactly marketing supported. But it was primarily outbound, and a lot of the role was to kind of build the brand as we did demand gen, so we started to get more inbound.
So Salesforce comes in, they make the decision that, hey, this is a great fit, company's growing really well, we like the way you guys are a sales-focused organization, that'd be a nice fit for what we're doing. Mm-hmm. You decide not to stay.
Yes.
Any particular reasons for that, or let's talk about the path beyond that, beyond Exact Target then.
All
right, well, I don't put you on the spot.
First off, I'll say I have tremendous admiration for Salesforce. Like, it is an amazing organization. It really is. Mark Benioff's the CMO of Salesforce. That's just the way it works. I mean, he's a brilliant marketer. He's a brilliant messaging person. I think the average CMO tenure there is kind of sub 1 year. And I'm more of a builder at heart than anything. And I think we had built our team from, and many of you guys are here, and hi, good to see you guys. I don't remember exactly what it was when I left, but I think we went from like 10 to 400 or something, and I felt like a lot of what I wanted to do at ET we had accomplished, and a lot of it was around building the team. And my career is kind of run in these 7-year chunks. Ironically, it was about 7 years there, and I sort of this 10 years in B2C, 10 years in B2B. And I started doing some angel investing and early stage investing toward the end at Exact Target, and I realized our process of raising capital and how difficult it was for us at ET, it became a little bit easier because we were later stage, but the number of great companies I was seeing that just couldn't get funding started to move me, and there weren't enough entrepreneurs getting the mentorship they deserved. And so I spent about a year off on my own, kind of doing some board roles and early stage investing, and then decided to join Hyde Park.
How'd you get connected with Guy or Ezra? I don't know which one.
Yeah, it was Guy and Ira, and so it was crazy the way these things work. We ended up investing in 3 of the exact same deals, a company named G2 Crowd, and then Tinderbox and Octave, and then another company called Ahology in Cincinnati. We literally 3 of the deals I was investing in, they were investing in at the same time, and it was the same time they were looking to do another fund and raise a fund to bring on another partner, so it just kind of came together.
Great. So this is going to be a slight pause because I want you to articulate, if you can, and this is commercial time, articulate if you can, Hyde Park Venture Partners, what's the thesis that you guys look for in size and type of company, et cetera.
So we right now are operating a $65 million fund. Our first fund was $25 million, so we have around $90 million of assets under management. We invest only in the Midwest, so Indianapolis, Minneapolis, Ann Arbor, markets like that. We're spending a little bit more time in Toronto and Atlanta of late, but kind of underserved capital markets where we're not finding capital. Series A and seed stage. Primarily, all recurring revenue businesses, about 2/3 of those being kind of B2B SaaS, and the other part marketplace businesses. Typically companies that are around $1 million sort of run rate, ARR, and then we try to come in and help build out the management team, drive additional focus, and get it to 3-4 million ARR. That's kind of our sweet spot.
Ready for the Series B.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I assume there's capital follow on for that as well.
Right.
Just put a little bit away.
That's right.
All right, so I'm going to backtrack for just a second because I think my own personal experience with this is the idea of marketing, okay, is pretty broad. And when you say marketing or marketing plan, oftentimes people have like various ideas as to what that means. So in your lexicon, unpack that for us a little bit about what we mean by marketing and the marketer's role in that.
Yeah, I think when I went to school, they called it was like the 5 Ps or something. It was supposed to be product, place, price, promotion. I don't remember what all it is. I don't think I think marketing is really all the hard stuff nobody else wants to do. I think that's what it is. It's like, go change the website, go put it on an event, go, build relationships with customers, and so, in my role, it was do a little bit of whatever needed to be done as we grew and scale, but primarily what marketing is not is demand generation. That's a sub-component of what marketing is, but when I ask somebody to send a marketing plan and they send a demand gen plan, it's like, great, is all you're trying to do is demand gen, or is it also important to build the brand? Is it also important to focus on client success? Is it all? And I think for each organization it's different, but again, if you come back to this definition of the gears, it is what's that kind of connective tissue that needs to exist between the product team and the sales team. And I think messaging and positioning and demand generation are probably the most important things that marketing should focus on. And then out of that come a bunch of tactics around events and the website and those kind of things. But the basic building blocks I kind of think are getting messaging and positioning right, and then how do you take all of that and really focus it on go-to-market and supporting the sales team.
So where do you find this, where does the importance lie? I mean, I come out of B2B background. I was one of those people who was, said, here's your territory, go make something happen. Like, we weren't given anything. No lead lists, no nothing. And we just had to go find something, and we commissioned based on what we killed. That was my early days of sales. So there was very little marketing support other than the fact that we did trade shows every once in a while. And so if you're an early stage company, I know we try to push them along to go out and make sales. So where does that transition go from, okay, we're outbound trying to make something happen, to we've created demand gen, to, marketing is supporting sales with collateral or whatever, and we're creating a demand gen, to we're building a brand that people recognize. Where does that transition, or where should that transition happen, or how does that?
I think it's different based on each company and what segment you're serving. The way I generally view it is the founder early on is the one that's the head of sales. I mean, that's who should be driving primary sales efforts. And then it's usually bringing on a head of sales. A lot of people say we need a CMO. I don't think you need a CMO until you're at like $10 million run rate or beyond. I think what you need is a director of demand gen, probably when you're just crossing $1 million sort of run rate. And I believe marketing should own a number. I don't know why marketing just doesn't run toward a number and accountability. That is one of the things I love. I don't know if it was my finance background or what it was, but we were actually responsible for generating 50% of the close one new business that would happen each quarter. It needed to happen in our team, and then each person in my team had to own a specific quota to kind of make that happen. It wasn't about how many leads. It wasn't, sure, that was part of it. It was part of the indicators, but I mean, the real question was, in the boardroom, would the EVP of sales say, if we get an extra $1, sales and marketing are tied together on the income, the only two functions in the world that are tied together on the income statement. So the question is, if you get $1, where do you put, the incremental 10-cent bets within that dollar to go make it work? And sometimes there's a tendency to invest too heavily in sales, and then you starve the sales team instead of providing with the right level of support. So usually the right ratio early on is about 2/3 sales, 1/3 marketing, kind of in my view.
And trying to stage. And part of that is, in those early days, is figuring out, it's the small bets to figure out what actually does work. What drives inbound, what causes the bell to ring, et cetera.
And driving, I think knowing what doesn't work is just as important as what does. Might be more important, because you can figure out, you can get to a no a lot quicker. So I just believe in mass experimentation kind of across marketing and trying a lot of different things. Getting to what doesn't work, again, is as important as what does. And running toward that accountability. How else can you know you're successful unless you actually own the revenue numbers? So I think even a lot of the people on my team, a quarter of their compensation would be variable and tied toward is the sales team being successful in hitting their goals.
From the marketing perspective. So since we're talking here about going up market, enterprise kind of sales, talk a little bit about that transition around what does marketing look like as you're going from, okay, we're kind of mid-market because we can get closes, now we know we want to move to an enterprise, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, what we just talked about, but what does that look like from a marketer's perspective? Where does that more of the demand gen and more of the branding, and how does that start to play in?
Yeah. So the way I've thought about it is, if you think about, it's really the question of branding and demand gen. And I'm not sure if the two fight against each other as much as we think they do, or if they complement one another. Because a lot of times on your biggest, what we would call branding days, then you're seeing the most activity and drive to the website. You're seeing the most, almost every time that we had a big branding push, we'd have our biggest demand gen day. So I actually think the two may not be quite as separate as people think. But generally speaking, if you view a big box, I think in the beginning, if demand gen kind of goes down and to the right, like 95% of my time I would spend with the sales team in my first year or 18 months was on how many leads and opportunities were we driving and what percent of the overall pipeline was it. Toward my last 2 years, I think marketing's job is almost like the product team. I viewed it as to build a platform that was so broad and so powerful that you could snap a limitless, unlimited number of apps into it, being salespeople. And the only way to do that is to build your brand through analyst relations and other partnerships and user conferences. And I bet in my last 2 years, we never talked about demand generation. Maybe a little bit, but the primary thing is, what were we doing to drive the activities it took to be a real category leader? What could we do now that we kind of had the market by the throat to just take it? And to do that kind of activities was much more around winning Forrester, around winning Gartner, creating a big user conference, doing some of those kind of things. So where, I think in the first, I've always said that demand generation is what gives you the political capital and the actual, the relational capital, and actually the real capital, the money, to go and do the fun stuff. So don't fight it. Like in the first 18 months, you should just be all in driving demand. Then drive demand as much as you can in a way that creates brand with it. So if you have a chance to go into a user conference and you're going to be sponsoring that and have a booth, maybe it's worth paying $25,000 more to have a booth that's a little bit bigger at Dreamforce than you should, or to throw a party, or to do something else. But that doesn't mean go and buy billboards, right? So it's still do demand gen stuff, but in a way that builds the brand while you do it. So that's kind of where the art and science come in.
So there's a couple of things that you said there that I kind of on my thoughts of, let's unpack a little bit more. So one of those is analysts. So for those folks who don't know, never thought about how the analysts, explain how that works with how you get an analyst interested in you and what it costs you to kind of get in a Forrester or Gartner quadrant kind of thing.
Yeah. Do you guys know Forrester, Gartner? Okay, just sort of making sure. So they're evil people. They really are. It's just, no, they're not. They're very nice people. But it is, most significant, they create something called a wave report, which, Forrester does, or a magic quadrant. And basically it's a stack rank of all the different vendors. I think if they actually did a stack rank of how much you spent with them, it would ironically look about the same as what the actual ratings were. But it kind of is what it is. And enterprise buyers still spend a fair amount of time looking at that. And then, corp dev people who are going to buy you spend a lot of time looking at that. VCs spend a lot of time looking at it. So the reality is it still matters. I think it matters. There's a company now that's out there called G2 Crowd, which I happen to invest in and love what they're doing. But the reason I got involved way early on when they were little guys is they're democratizing that whole process to make it more like Yelp, which is kind of the way I think it should be. Like, I want to talk to the people who are actually using the software, not an analyst who does a report every 2 years who's actually never even bought software for the category. But I tell you what, it takes a lot of time. I've been through 13 wave reports and wave reports and magic quadrants kind of combined, and they take months and months of time. And
working with the analyst to get yourself in a category and
say what category they want to put you in is not the category you think you should be in, and how do you define that? Then how do you build relationships with all the different analysts, and how do you really? I mean, analysts can be really helpful when you get a good one, but how do you really pull them into your team and make sure they really understand what you're doing? Like an example was, we could not, ExactTarget had more enterprise clients when I got there than any other email company in the country. But Forrester would not let us into their report because more than 25% of our revenue didn't come from enterprises. So just because we had a really big denominator meant that we couldn't be in the report, which doesn't make any sense, but that was their criteria. So the first 18 months was basically lobbying them and getting them to change the criteria, which our competitors obviously didn't want to happen, say that it should be based on the number of enterprises you have, not what percent of your business is coming from enterprise. Yeah. So it can be, how do you get in, then how do you help shape and define a category, to then how do you build a relationship, and the process takes about 9 months, kind of end to end.
And a fair amount of capital on top of that, I suspect.
It does.
Not just the capital that pay you to go do it, but
several $100,000. So my advice is, do not mess with analysts at all, like until you're, I don't know. You should give them briefings, and your goals should be to be something like being named a hot company or an emerging company by Gartner. That's really all you want for a while. Until you're more than 25 million or something, it's just not worth messing around with.
All right, so the next category below that, okay, now you mentioned G2 Grad. I know you guys are invested in that. Or you personally invested in that?
I am, yeah. I wrote the first angel check for them.
So they do have a competitor, which is slightly larger. It's out of Silicon Valley, Capterra. Is that right?
They got bought by Gartner.
Really?
They did.
So are they still operating in the same way, or they've been sucked into?
They've been sucked into the machine.
Yeah. Congratulations. Okay. Yeah, because my question around that was, okay, where do you place your bets as it relates to those two platforms?
G2 Crowd.
So, of course.
No, there's 3 people in that space. There's Trust Radius, G2 Crowd, and Capterra. And I'm biased. I told you guys what I think, but G2 Crowd has more reviews than the other guys combined and double. So I believe that is what's getting the most traction, but they have respectable platforms too. I think anybody who's building a platform that gives customers and end users a voice is worth spending time on. And the amount of time that takes is fractional. You're getting 10 customers to review your software. I mean, that might take, I don't know, that doesn't take any time. So
if you've got customers at this stage and they're happy with your, focus them and get them to go do that.
Yeah. I'll say in addition to that you also happen to already be a Hyde Park Venture Partners portfolio company. Could you use G2 Crowd for free?
Yeah, we probably could work that out, John.
Wow, there you go, added benefit.
Yeah.
So, okay, so then the other one that we talked about, which was the partner, you kind of hit on in that string of things, was the partnerships.
Yeah.
And so when I have this knee-jerk reaction around partnerships, and this is not, so I'm going to let you unpack this a little bit more, but my knee-jerk reaction is I want to have something, when I'm looking at my scale-up plan, I of course am biased towards sales because I can put a button, a seat, pick up the phone. I know so many phone calls I'm going to get an order, and that's kind of how I have scaled companies in the past. When I'm
biased towards sales too, by the way.
Okay.
Everything should revolve around sales.
So, but partnerships to me have always been sort of like, well, I'm going to let you go sell my stuff for me, or maybe I'll have a guy support you, and I hope that maybe you pick up my stuff and sell it with the other 20 things you're selling.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how you view partnerships and what that means, because I think your version of it is not kind of the traditional sort of sales partnership kind of a thing.
Right. So I think there's 3 different categories of partners that I see. The first one that probably is most obvious is just ISVs, or other software companies that you're driving productized integrations with. So you have to recognize other companies. Actually, Jackson here from Hyde Park just wrote an article on this today, because I think partnerships are so important, ironically, and I think it is the most under-thought about thing that I have seen from Midwest software. It comes naturally on the coast, but not as naturally here. So the first one is, what other software companies are your companies living and breathing with every day? I mean, Clear is a good example of what's happening with SAP and with others. It's like that. It's building your company kind of around another sort of software company where they have a hole or something else. The second one would be a reseller partner. So it might be an agency or a consultancy or somebody else who's reselling your software on your behalf. And the third one would be like a services partner. So as you get big enough, you don't want all the services, but services are important, so you're giving that to, a Blue Wolf or some other company to help with that. The one that I think is most important is the integrated partnerships. So Six, there's a company that we invested in here recently, and they just announced an integration with HubSpot. And so they were up in front of HubSpot, 17,000 customers talking about their productized integration. And look, I think the fastest way to build your brand is on the back of somebody else. And I unabashedly did that at ExactTarget, and I learned it from what Omniture did. And so I built our brand on the back of Salesforce, Adobe, Omniture, and Microsoft. You just build deep, deep partnerships with them. If nobody's heard of your company, they've heard of those companies, so you kind of get some credit for being in that crowd. Then you're building your brand, you're building your demand gen, and you're finding your corp dev home.
Now, but as a product side of that, usually there needs to be some kind of integration into that product.
Yeah, now it can just be a bi-directional exchange of data. I mean, most, it can be as deep as what somebody like, Clear's doing, or it could be, as shallow as just realizing, look, a lot of people come to us and say, we're building a new platform of record for X, Y, or Z. And what I'll say to you is, guess what? You're not building a new platform of record, because people already have too many platforms of record. It's going to be really hard for you to be another one of those. So people already have, even within the marketing stack, you might know, Sean, but isn't it like the average, 10 to 12 pieces of software an average marketing department has? So whatever it is that somebody else is using day in and day out, that's their platform of record. So ExactTarget actually had 1,200 productized integrations running with Salesforce. But all that meant is we were iframed inside of Salesforce, and the data exchanged back and forth.
So,
but
it does still require a fair, thought process, in the sense that those kind of partnerships do require some dev time. And so that becomes really a strategic piece, because all three wheels need to be working together.
Yes.
We need to make a strategic decision and then let that flow out into how we do that.
Yes.
Which is why it's important to have a CMO role at the C-suite, having those conversations about how does this affect us as a product and a brand and et cetera.
I think it is. That's why we ran partnerships on the partner team. Yeah.
How early does it make sense to do that?
I think you should be thinking about it from the very beginning with customers, and it's just what other software applications are using, what else might this integrate into, understanding how, having empathy for what their day job looks like. I've been in these jobs, and the reason I think I became fairly effective at selling marketing software is I've used a lot of marketing software. And it's not realistic that you're going to jump in and out of 12 different applications each day. So I'm going to use one thing or two things or three maybe, and how does it all work together, and how do you make my life easier? So I think it's somebody, as much as anything, representing voice of customer. Sometimes the CRO or the head of sales is doing that, or a customer success person. But I think marketing is the best place to do it.
So you hit on another topic that I was thinking about, which is inside an organization, you tend to see sales driven early on. Marketing kind of becomes this subservient to sales at some point. If you're a CEO, where does that need to land? As you kind of, obviously as a CEO, your job is really to be all of that. And building the sales process as you're being the chief salesperson, and understanding where those things are coming from. But how does that organizationally need to structure? Is it a CRO with sales and marketing beneath it, or is it marketing is really the core craftsman and sales kind of reports to them, or how do you, or is there a good answer to that, or?
I think a lot of it, the honest answer is it depends. And I think early on, you can't afford to have sometimes executives over both. So if you have to pick one, what are you going to hire? Unless your CMO can go out and sell a lot, you're going to hire a head of sales. Typically, that's kind of just the way it works. When you think about how do they go together, I believe it should be so amorphous, it's hard to tell where one picks up and the other leaves off. And I mean that pretty literally. So the way we ran our sales and marketing team was, I ran everything that was non-quota bearing, and that meant training and enablement, it meant partners, it meant literally anything that wasn't quota. I think our team pretty much ran so that the sales team could focus on quota. But our marketing people were embedded in the sales team meetings, the sales team people were embedded in our meetings, it all kind of just went together, and it was really more pods working together, and marketing people out co-selling with the sales team. But I think early on it absolutely needs to be very sales driven and very, very customer driven. And when you're marketing to marketers, I think you lean towards building a marketing function more quickly versus if you're selling to an HR function. So for us, it was probably disproportionately important because a marketer in the room is sometimes carrying more weight than a salesperson in the room.
Yeah. Which, as you said, it depends on who you're selling to, what that looks like. So, so let's talk about the transition. So, there's a number of folks in here that are, early or sort of in early growth stage here. What is that early version of who your target customer? How do you kind of figure out how far up do we push? When do we want to be a enterprise selling company, or what might that look like in the early days as you kind of move forward?
So I think that two things, there's enterprise selling and then there's selling into an enterprise, and they sound like the same thing, but they're pretty different. So selling into an enterprise would be, Roche is going to do a $50,000 deal with us. That is more manageable than we're doing a system-wide implementation for a company like Roche. So I think the first off is drawing that distinction. My really honest answer to that is, if you really have a chance to step back and study what most successful software companies have done, they built velocity in the mid-market first and then moved into the enterprise. Because enterprise selling is just really hard. In the beginning, cash is king, and enterprise selling it takes a long time. Just the sales cycles, they shouldn't be as long as they are, but they're 6, 9, 12 months long. And it's just expensive to kind of wait that out sometimes. And so if my advice is start small and start mid-market, grind a lot of those out, get pulled inside the enterprise, and then you'll have a company that becomes your champion in implementation, becomes bigger and bigger. Whereas if you see there's selling $1 million deal right off the bat, it's pretty hard to do. I've always said, everybody talks about we're going to go whale hunting, and whale hunting's a lot of fun. The problem is what happens when you catch a whale. Because if you're in a little fishing boat, it'll just drag your butt all over the place. It is, unless you're really equipped to catch a whale. Whale hunting sounds fun, but I've been there, and it's tough.
So just to make sure I caught that right. So selling into the enterprise to say, okay, well, we're going to go after the Roche or whatever it is, but we're not going to try and do the entire system wide. We're going to try and pick off a division or to some extent try and figure out how to do that.
Yeah, because that is, you have to first start off with what's your ICP, what's your ideal customer profile, who exactly are you trying to sell into, who's the persona of that, and what problems are they trying to solve. That's where I think you should start with. And then within your ICP, it could be actually a small division of One America is probably going to look an awful lot like another couple hundred person company. There's some nuances in how do you get through purchasing and procurement and those kind of things, but the actual use case for the software may not be all that different.
So we've talked an awful lot about how the successes of all the different pieces and things you've been a part of and the companies that are being successful. Let's talk a little bit about the mistakes along the way.
Well, I didn't make any mistakes. Actually, the good news is I made a lot of mistakes at WebTrends, and I made a good number at ET, but the number that I made at WebTrends really helped when we transitioned over. Mistakes, where to start? I think one of the first ones we've talked about sales and marketing, and I think when you get into this, I don't know why. I've been really fortunate, I think, or really intentional that the relationship I've had with the sales team has always been very constructive. It's not that it's always easy, but we're always very much working together. And I think the first thing is when you end up sales and marketing not working together, it gets really tough in a hurry. I think another one is focusing too much on demand generation and not enough on your messaging and positioning. Because if you don't know exactly who you're selling to and exactly what your value proposition is, then most of the money that you're spending is probably going to be wasted. Like, it's so critical that you define who you are, what you do, and why you're different, and you're laser focused. Get that done before you go and spend a lot of money. And I think people kind of do it the other way around, because they're like, well, where's the lead? So you get to work and you just start doing a lot of marketing stuff, and it's like, oh my gosh, we didn't get our positioning right to start with. So I think that's a big one. Not relying on partners early enough. They can really help with getting you into the enterprise more quickly. And then not giving the sales team the proper support they need to go do it. I mean, the reality is to go do an enterprise sale, it requires usually a cold calling person, it requires some marketing support, it requires kind of this, I call it a sales tax. So with a salesperson, there's the tax of all the help that needs to go with them. And then I think not focusing enough on client success early on. So much focus on, we're just going to go and win this great logo. We're going to go and win Nike. We're going to go and win Nike. And then you win Nike and you realize you've got a tiger by the tail and you did not spend enough time doing whatever it took to make them successful right off the bat. So I think, it sounds so obvious. It's like, why would we not appreciate client success? But it just happens unless you're not very intentional about it.
How much does, kind of shifting tack here, but you talk about taking a team from 10 to 400 or whatever it was, how much does that team building culture inside that become part of that? I know I've seen some dysfunctional components to that where there's a lot of finger pointing. They're giving me crap leads, they can't close the leads we give them, that kind of a thing. But
I mean, the answer I kind of want to start to give you is it's everything. Because I don't know if you're not on the same page, none of the other stuff matters. I mean, unless literally I can give my CEO or the head of sales a scorecard and say all the great things we did. The real question is, when you're inside the boardroom and you miss the number and the heat's on, does the CRO turn around and throw the marketing function under the bus, or say, no, the marketing was all in, they did everything they could to support us, and our folks missed? Or when the sales reps are coming and complaining to the head of sales, or when my team in marketing would be coming and complaining that sales reps weren't doing their job. If there's not that cultural alignment, it really does all fall apart very, very quickly. So in terms of intentionality, that was probably the number one thing I focused on. Yeah.
not just in your department, but
across the board.
the entire
Certainly
board.
within sales and marketing, but I think pervasively across both of those functions. But then it moves to sales, marketing, client success, product. I mean, it's all got to work together.
Yeah.
Like it's those gears. But if it doesn't work in sales and marketing, it's not going to work anywhere.
So I would probably be remiss if we got off the topic of selling into the enterprise. We didn't talk a little bit about account-based marketing and how does that fit in, and understanding your personas, and how do we create materials for that, and how do we target that. And I know you are invested in a company in that space, so I figured I would ask the question and see what your thoughts are at this point about that.
I'm crazy about account-based marketing. I think most people were doing account-based.
Does everybody know what account-based marketing is?
So it's the whole idea of basically, I mean, it's as simple as instead of saying it's about quality, it's about quantity. And instead of saying you need to produce, 1,000 leads going into a quarter, it's just who are the named accounts that we want to go after, and then how are sales and marketing going to work together to go do those accounts. So if there's a giant marketing funnel that starts super broad and gets narrow, why wouldn't you just flip it and start with exactly who you should be going after? And the reality is, because most sales teams aren't disciplined to have enough named account lists. And if you had named account lists, that's probably what your marketing team should work on to support. And then within that, you could say, not only do we want to go after GE, so we're going to buy an advertising campaign, and we're going to build our creative around not just GE, but all the different economic buyers within GE that we're trying to target, and then it's dynamically kind of changing that creative. And it just works. I mean, that's the way. There was no way to scale it with technology, but it really just comes to sales and marketing working together on specific named accounts. So
Do you have to get to a certain point though, as you get bigger? Because I feel like you're a startup and you're a scale up and you're working on mid-market, right? At some point in time, I think there's got to be a point where you do focus on that. Hey, we're doing a lot of work on fintech, or we're doing a lot of work on health. Let's focus on that area. Would you agree on that point? Or?
So what's the question?
The question is, at what point does that work? I agree with it completely,
yeah.
but at what point does marketing and sales have to get together and say, hey, let's go target these accounts because we see the trends?
Yeah. Well, I think there's constant experimentation, because the reality is you never know for sure. Like you've got named accounts, but the world changes. So I think I do think sales reps should have named accounts, and you should figure out exactly who it is you want to go after, and sales and marketing should work to do that. Within that, you might have a particular quarter and say, we're going to experiment within the retail vertical, and then we're going to go real wide again. We're going to go and try some things. Now we want to try some fintech, in the back half of the year. So I do believe in the constant experimentation and tinkering kind of within a named account kind of mindset. I don't think it's ever that you just figure out who are the 100 accounts you want and you just, that's all you ever do. But the idea of more of your marketing should be spent instead of really broadly just on, paid search, just going in a more hyper-targeted way on the accounts you're trying to go after. How do you get that balance? Makes a ton of sense to me.
So,
about what percentage of resources would you devote to experimentation versus like a dedicated strategy? It's like a rule of thumb, like 10 to 20, 5 to 10.
depends on whether it's working or not, in my mind.
We always change an experiment. I'm curious if you had sort of like a rule of thumb.
Yeah.
You always try and...
In the beginning, a lot. And I think a lot of it's a mindset. I would try to ask in every one-on-one what isn't working, which actually kind of drives a mindset of innovation and like, boy, I better go figure out some stuff that doesn't work. Because I think it's really important to figure out what doesn't work. I think early on, like, I don't know if I have an exact rule of thumb, but I could tell you it might be just kind of part my personality. It's sort of question everything. So in the first 6 to 12 months, it was probably almost 100% experimentation. Not so much that like if we know trade shows work, we're going to completely throw those away, but it's like, why did that one work? And if we've done it 3 years in a row, why do you think it's going to work the 4th year? And so just constantly tinkering within that. But the more you get it dialed in, then you're tinkering more with the creative. So you might say, instead of spending broadly, like, why aren't we doing more ad buying on LinkedIn? And then within LinkedIn, as you figure out that works as a medium, then you're trying to target different personas. But I think, so it's a constant mindset, and then toward the end, it does become more of a well-oiled machine, and you just start to know what works. But man, I think just massive experimentation in the beginning.
So just to tag off the earlier question here just a little bit, does that depend on the order size?
Oh, sure.
So I mean, if you're picking up the phone, smiling, dialing, and you're doing $1,000 a year deals, there's probably a buyer that can make a decision, and you can target. It's going to be the CEO or the founder or
yes.
whatever it is. You get to $10,000 a year price tag, you're probably going to have 2 or 3 economic buyers inside there, or users,
yeah.
buyers, et cetera. They're going to have to make that decision. And so this comes down to the issue of the personas and understanding the personas in there.
Yeah.
And then when you get up to an enterprise or selling into the enterprise, you may have as many as 7 to 10 different people that
yes.
you're lucky you figured out who they are.
Yes. You don't even know who they are till the end sometimes.
Yeah.
No, I think that's right. I think that's right. There is no, like, if you go and look, there is no book on this. And I think the reason there's no book is, like, it is as much art as it is science, and the only way to figure it out is to get in and kind of make some mistakes. And partly I want to give the answer, it depends, to everything you're saying, but I know that would be really annoying. Everybody who's here, if everything I said was, it depends. So I'm trying to give advice, that generally speaking sort of works, but absolutely the answer is it depends sometimes.
But when you get back, when you dial that back to the marketer's role in supporting the sales team, for example, part of that initial phase is to say, okay, I'm going to extract out of that CEO's head who are the people that you had to talk to get this deal done, and
yes.
those early deals done, and then who are each of those people. Let's build a profile of those personas. So even if we only have a conversation with one person, we're sending along stuff that supports the other folks.
Yes.
So that one person then can have an articulate conversation with
yes.
the right material, kind
yes.
of thing, right?
I think that's right. I think this idea of like, people calling marketing growth hacking kind of annoys me in some ways, because that kind of, it's kind of like insinuates that it's somebody sitting behind a giant spreadsheet just kind of like pulling levers and magic happens. And I think what really great marketing is getting into market, understand what problems somebody needs to have solved, how is your product and software doing that, and then how do you begin to tell those stories, find more of those stories, and then begin to sort of scale it through software and technology afterwards. It's really hard to do great marketing if you're inside the building, I think. So you've got to be out a lot and really know your customers and their problems and live the pain of the sales team in doing that.
So I'll back up for a second. How much time did you spend with McCorkle and his maniacal, I need to talk to a customer every single day approach to product?
He was a machine at that.
Yeah.
No question about it. Early on, I traveled a lot. A lot of it, I will tell you, for me, I balanced between the customers and the sales team. I really wanted to hear what the sales team had to say, because a lot of it is winning kind of the hearts and minds of the salespeople and knowing you're in it. But I would personally be involved in half a dozen deals each quarter. I can't say that I specifically picked up the phone and like had to talk to a customer every day, but it would be several times a week, and it would be, I don't think it ever happened that I wasn't working on multiple sales opportunities at the same time. It's just the way it should be.
What was your role in those deals?
It depended. I actually think that the cool thing about I could sell a lot of software because I wasn't a salesperson. Basically be like, look, I don't care if you buy or not. I don't get quota, I don't get commission. All I'm saying is I've done the job you're doing, and I've talked to a lot of other marketers. Here's what's happening. If you want to talk to these marketers and understand kind of what they went through and why they picked us, you should do that. But like, I lived in your job, and here's how we can help you. And so I would go in, and once it was fairly far along in the process, it would typically look like, for bigger customers, going in the night before, working with the sales team, getting the demo right, getting the pitch right, getting it all nailed down, being kind of executive sponsor on those deals, speaking maybe a third of the time, letting the sales rep do their job, but then kind of doing the executive relationship building. That was pretty common for most of the senior folks on our team. I really believe in enterprise selling. Executive sponsors are really important. I really do think people buy from people more than they do companies still. And yeah, I just think that's true. And the more you understand them and the problems they're having, the better.
I would agree with that 100%, especially at the executive level. You have an executive sponsor there to connect. Right? You can't, the salesperson just can't be everything to everyone. They've got to close a deal.
It's an impossible job
Right.
without help everywhere. Yeah, it's hard to do.
I love it.
So, two final pieces here.
Sure.
One, this is for you, and we kind of broad-based brushed across a whole bunch of stuff. Is there anything about selling into the enterprises that we've missed that I haven't really kind of picked on that you know, from either your experience, but also you're now on the other side as an investor looking at companies and you're watching what they're doing, right, wrong, etc. What kind of thoughts do you have about that you'd want to pass on to a bunch of early stage companies?
It's hard, and I have a lot of appreciation for what all of you are trying to do. I've been in those shoes, and now I watch a lot of it. It's hard, and so I don't stand in judgment because I've made a lot of the same mistakes. What I would say is, when I was in the operator's shoes, I had a tendency to get more emotionally involved. You think you have better product market fit than you actually do sometimes, would be what I'd say. Because you're in there, you're talking to clients, they're validating, you're getting excited, and now the vantage point I have is more like watching a game from the stands instead of being a player on the field. And I'm like, well, you have like 3 customers who are doing that, you don't have 30. And so before like you really push the gas and you get ready to like hire 16 salespeople and really go after it, you're probably not as far along as you think you are, or quite as good as you think you are yet. And it's just, letting it more of it play out, getting more of that pattern recognition, and there's a tendency to just think, man, we've got it. Because you have to feel that way. When you're in the trenches doing that work, you have to get excited by it, and you have to do it, but the reality is, I think there's a tendency to punch the gas a little bit too early, and then, you know what, there's actually probably 12 customers not like that, not 1,200 customers like that, and we should have hired not as many sales reps or whatever it was. So just more constant like tinkering and experimenting, and then trying to be very bullish on what you're doing, while sometimes kind of have that, you know, Andy Grove's only the paranoid, you know, survive kind of mindset, where you're just confident, man, are we really as far along as we think we are?
So on this term of product market fit, so I have my own definition of that based on my personal experience. So this is not a well-researched kind of thing, but for me, it was always when we made that transition to the point where we're trying to figure it out, we're trying to figure it out, we're trying to figure it out. What drives the, you know, what drives that lead velocity rate to the point where I no longer had to worry about driving the lead velocity rate. It was all infrastructure backfilling at that point. And when I got to a point where it was, how do I, you know, tomorrow we're going to be twice as big as we are today. Where are the wheels going to fall off? And as you know, as president, I'm looking across all the functions, trying to say, how do I make sure that we're doing this and we're doing this? And to me, that kind of feels like, okay, I've got product market fit. We understand what drives the bell. I've got a lever here. If I push on the lever, it goes up. If I pull back on the lever, we can kind of, you know, moderate that kind of a thing.
Would you want a definition?
Well, no, I'm just saying, is that...
like, I don't know if I have one. The only way I can describe it is it's a bit like being in an airplane in that moment when you get lift and you kind of feel it. Like, trying to describe that to somebody is really hard. But once you have lift and you know what it feels like, you kind of know what it feels like. And when I see companies working so hard and trying everything and working 80 hours a week and and it's just not working, well, you don't have it yet. And it's that moment where things kind of click and you're feeling lift and you're feeling some scalability and repeatability, and then I think there's different stages of it. You can have product market fit and then lose it, or you can have product market fit within a market that was actually a pretty small market, and now you need to get a different kind of product market fit. So the mistake I've made is thinking, we went through this with a company called Ahology. We nailed it at first. We thought we had massive product market fit. We hired 5 salespeople. We went after it. We didn't have what we thought we had, and it didn't quite work, and we ended up having to back way down off of that. Well, now we found it again, and the company's like tripled and did well. But in hindsight, we thought we did have it, but we had it within a too small of a niche of customers. So I think it's actually more of I think product market fit, I've come to understand it as being something that's more fluid than once you've got it, you've got it.
Yeah.
It's when you're feeling that lift and synergy, and when you feel it start to go away, something's not right, and you have to listen to that instinct.
I would say that that idea that what got us here probably won't get us there mindset. If you take a look at the stages that Battery writes about, where he talks about the triple, double, double, that each stage of that becomes kind of along those lines. It's like we had this experience, which kind of made me resonate with that article that he wrote, was, you know, we had something that just was, I mean, we had 27% growth every month for 18 straight months. And all of a sudden it just went, and we like flatlined. And it's like what got us to that point was phenomenal. But that channel basically just stopped being productive, new business. And so we had to completely revamp how we did things in order to go and, you know, double again the next size up. So but I think if you understand that that's coming, that's kind of the key.
Yes.
In that sense. So
It's always coming.
Yeah. Yes, it will eventually come, right?
Yeah.
There's diminishing returns on
everything.
on marketing spend per channel. So, all right. So with that, that's all I had in the questions that I had for you. So I wanted to open it up to you guys, your burning questions and thoughts that you have for Tim, and see what we come up with. So, yeah, Green.
So, Tim, you've got a lot of visibility into several companies that have $1 million in ARR that are trying to get to 3 or 4. And you mentioned messaging, positioning, demand gen. What do you typically see that's not working of those 3 when trying to get from 1 to 4?
messaging and positioning is the most common one that's off, because the problem is you can't afford a product marketing person yet. And messaging doesn't work super good when it's by committee. So it's like who's going to drive it, and it's the one that gets off the most quickly, and it takes a while to fix. And then I think it is not focusing on, you think it's a linear model, and you look at your spreadsheet, and you say, all I have to do is go from 1 rep to 3 reps to 9 reps to 12 reps. Well, you forget about spans of control, and then you've got to add managers, and then the message gets diluted, and they just quit ramping as fast as you'll think. It doesn't work that well. So probably sales training and enablement is the one that comes right after messaging. So it's messaging and positioning, sales training and enablement. Demand gen you can actually fix pretty darn quick if you have to. It's the easiest one to throttle up and down, and then probably hiring too fast and losing control of burn, losing control of your own destiny because your burn gets too high because you've hired too many reps too fast. So
It does. Why do you think the messaging is typically off? Is that because the CEO or president is too in the weeds or too in the trenches, where he's outlined, here's our customers, here's what we're saying to them, and you as a board member is like,
yeah,
are you sure about that?
Yeah, I think that can be part of it. I think it's just hard to do. I found messaging and positioning the thing that I've had to work the hardest at, and started to become, I hope, semi-competent after a period of years of focusing on it. I think one of the reasons that everybody thinks they're more special than they really are is like probably the honest answer to that. And getting at the why you're different really, I think, is the most important part. So there's who we are, what we do, and then really getting at the why you're different, and nailing the why you're different, which becomes your true point of differentiation, kind of your red thread that you can then drive through the rest of what you're doing, and that drives your ideal customer profile. It drives everything. But it probably, I mean, honestly, it took me probably 3 months to drive consensus every time I did this on why we were different, because everybody had a different answer on why we thought. Our CTO would think why we're different is because our infrastructure is world class, or and everybody thinks it's different, right? So, but getting to and spending enough time with customers that it passes that BS test, and is it really different, is probably the biggest one.
You mentioned enterprise sales is different than selling into enterprise, and I think that your background, obviously, I know is around software and SaaS and software. What about for services? Do you see a different philosophy based on that? If you're selling services into enterprise, do you still believe that dichotomy exists? I believe it does. I'm just curious on your
It's probably not as severe, because there's a bigger need for services like more quickly. Typically, people are just dying for good help. It's more around the dynamics of, people typically think like enterprise sales cycles are just like a year. I wish they weren't. They just take forever. And the problem is, it's not that enterprises are bad business. It's just, do you have enough cash that you can outlast how long it takes for them to make up their mind on what they want to do? So a lot of it's making sure that your financing strategy matches your operating strategy, if that makes sense. So if you know it's going to take that long, then you've got the right amount of capital to go do it. But I think it's probably slightly easier within services. Yes.
So back to your thought on partnerships.
Yes.
And my question's more around when you've identified those who you want to partner with, and in some cases a partnership might exclude another partner in the space, right?
Yeah.
So talk about the decision making that you would go through perhaps to choose that, particularly when you're the small fish in the pond, right?
Yes.
So what are you looking for? What is the reciprocity out of that?
Yes.
Out of that, given what you can deliver to that relationship?
Yeah, this is a good point. I believe, so you have different categories of partners. You want the big logos at first, but the reality is they're going to do nothing for you. Nothing, because they just don't care about you. You're too small. What they will do is help with your brand, and you're better off to focus on some of the mid-market partners who do care enough that they can spend the time. But what the biggest, always drive it down, instead of a general discussion on partnerships, to me it's always, let's crack this down into 2 or 3 customers that we can help you go win. And when you can get them into the who are you struggling with, and then what hole can we fill that you don't have, and then you start to help their sales reps win some deals because you're filling in a hole. Then you start to get a lot of attention in a hurry, and then it starts to become more pull than push. So, you know, it's holding off from that exclusivity as long as you can. It's just kind of playing nice with all the big, getting the logo on your website or whatever you need to do at first. Focusing on a couple of the mid, but always just drive it down to that customer and where you can add value, and then good things follow. Yeah. Hey, Catherine.
Following up with partnerships, you kind of mentioned, I think you said building on the backs of larger brands. Can you talk like some specific things that you felt like you did that accomplished that? So is it like, we're gonna go out and do webinars, partner webinars with them every quarter? Are we going out and we're gonna sponsor their party at Dream? Like just some things that you felt like really did make a difference?
Yeah. Yeah, I think specific examples would be, there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all, and it definitely depends on the partnering company and what they do best. So a good example would be starting off early with us with Salesforce. Once we got to a couple of dozen customers, then it became more of a productized integration, because Salesforce is just so big. I mean, unless you want to spend a ton of money at Dreamforce, like what do you do? Like, your sales reps don't really care about you, and I don't know, unless you can write a big giant check, like what do you do, honestly? So sure, you can spin up a little party around Dreamforce, or you can do a little thing in New York or here or there, but it's hard to do much. Omniture at that time was like 4 times bigger than us, but not 100 times bigger than us. It was enough that you could sort of wrap your arms around it. So it looked like, instead of just, we were email and they were web analytics, it was, why not just focus on a joint solution, which should just be email remarketing using web analytics. And you get their product manager, our product manager, you make it more around the product. And a webinar is usually the easiest way to do it. And you get a customer, you get a joint customer to talk about what you did together. You take that customer, then you build kind of your one-pager and your use case, and then you kind of get that on the website. But webinar is the easiest, and then I think the next best thing is in-market events, where they're driving customers, you're driving customers. The reality is, you'll have to pull more than your fair share of the weight. Like they'll say, we'll drive half the people, they won't. But you prove your worth, and you get people there, and you start to show you add value. So I think it's webinars, collateral, in-market events, and then eventually, as things are starting to work, spending a little bit more at their user conference than you would have. So instead of like buying like the $7,000 booth, we're going to buy, I don't know, like the $20,000 one. But it's kind of working it up that way.
Thank you. And another question about messaging. That's a hard one.
It's hard.
And how do you, when you think about moving up market there, I mean, the mid-market customer, I think, is looking for a different thing than the enterprise.
Yes, yes.
How do you start to make that shift in messaging and positioning and not alienate? I mean, this is a very broad question, but
Yeah.
not alienate the mid-market, right? They're
Yes.
your bread and butter, they're your ARR, keeping that lights on while you're trying to get the whale.
Yes.
And still be professional, be enterprise from your branding and your
Yes.
messaging, and have what's important to them, whether it is, security of your platform, that kind of stuff.
Yes, this is a good one.
How-
So
yeah, how do you
here's
manage
what I believe, here's how I've started to make it work. This who we are, 3 bullet points, what we do, 3 bullet points, why we're different, 3. The who we are should never change. Everybody, if you have an identity crisis and you don't know who you are, then nobody else is going to know who you are. So that never should change. The what we do and the why we're different, I think you can have 6 to 9 different points, and you can move more into persona-based messaging. So if you're selling to a CMO, you would describe what you do very differently than you would somebody who just started doing email marketing a year ago. And so you can cut it differently based on vertical, based on seniority of the person, based on customer size, etc. So then I think having a variety of things that you can pull out of your hat, but they're all still scripted, they just make more sense based on those use cases for the what we do, but really making sure you nail the why we're different. That's the one that you can have a couple of those, and making sure you get that one really clear for the different segments. But unfortunately, most companies stink at all those. the who we are is the one that just needs to be locked down, and then the other one should be more. I really believe in persona-based messaging. So a fun thing that we did, we actually did. Like had sales reps draw like random things out of a hat. So you're selling into a VP of marketing for an e-commerce store who is using these two software products. You have 3 minutes, go away. It was like American Idol, basically. Then it was like, come stand up and pitch. Using, based on what you know about those, how would you come up? So it's giving, I call it a freedom within a framework. So it's like, here's kind of the basic points, and then how do you want to allow somebody to craft that based on the framework you created? Does that make sense? Because if it's so rigid, then it's so broad, it just feels like corporate speak and a lot of, gobbledygook. Yeah, I think that's a technical word, gobbledygook.
Well, as fun as this has been, I know you have another event you have to get to this evening. So with that, why don't we give Tim a hand?
Thank you.